I want to thank Mrs. DeVos for your willingness to serve and for being here, for your passion about education for your family as well. I agree with you, and the committee members know this, that our public school system is not working for too many of our kids, particularly those living in poverty. I think that's utterly unacceptable, and the fact that we don't pay attention to it, the fact that we treat America's children like they're someone else's children, I think is something that this generation is going to have to pay for in the future. Every kid in this country should have access to a great public school. I support parents' choices among high-quality public schools and charter schools, and I think plays a critical role in education. But the goal for me has never been school choice for its own end. The goal is high-quality public schools where every kid in every neighborhood can receive a great education. For a kid from a low-income family, there's no difference between, there may be a philosophical difference, but there's no practical difference between forced to attend a terrible school and being given a chance to choose among 5 terrible schools. That's no choice at all, and it's certainly not a meaningful one. In Denver, we made a different deal. A deal that said we're going to create a public choice system, we're going to authorize charters, we're going to create innovation schools and strengthen traditional schools. But without exception, we demanded quality and implemented strong accountability. And as far as I can tell, Detroit and Michigan, to a degree, has followed exactly the opposite path. According to one analysis, the Detroit public schools, and by the way, it's not easy to figure this out because there's so little accountability in Michigan. The Detroit public schools average 9%. 9% of the kids are proficient. The charter schools do a little better. 14% of the kids are proficient. I'll stipulate that the charter schools are doing better, but that's a horrible outcome for everybody involved. According to an Education Trust report, 2013, the majority of charter schools in Michigan perform worse than the Detroit public schools when it came to African American students in 8th grade math. Nearly half of charter schools in Michigan ranked in the bottom quarter of all schools statewide. So my question is this, not a false choice about whether we should have choice or whether we shouldn't have choice. We should have choice. But what you've learned in the last 20 years of this work in Michigan that has changed your mind about what it is that kids need in America in the 21st century.
Senator, thank you for that question. And first of all, I look forward to correcting some of the record regarding Detroit. And I think it's really important, first of all, to put Detroit in context. In 1950, there were 1.8 million people living in the city of Detroit. Today, there's less than 700,000, 675,000 roughly. Anyone with any means in the city of Detroit has basically, with school-age students, has basically left the city, and the students, there today.
With respect, I'm not asking for a history of Detroit. What I'd like to know, what I asked about was the last 20 years of school reform that you've been so involved with in Michigan.
Yes, but you were referring specifically to the Detroit schools, and
right.
The reality today is that 8 out of 10 students in Detroit are living in poverty. Nobody accepts that the results in Detroit overall are acceptable. There's clearly room for a lot more improvement, but the reality is that more than half of the
I'm sorry. I'm sensitive because I'm not going to get a second round of questions. Have you learned about the failures of the Detroit public schools and Detroit charter schools that has informed your decision-making as the Secretary of Education? What went wrong there that's going to go right in cities all across America as a result of your philosophy about how we ought to move the country forward?
Actually, I believe that there's a lot that has gone right in Detroit and in Michigan with regard to charter schools. The notion that there hasn't been accountability is just wrong. It's it's false news. It's not correct at all. The reality is that charter schools in Michigan have been accountable, fully accountable to their overseeing bodies and to the state since their history.
If that's true, why are there so many failing charter schools in Michigan?
122 charter schools have been closed since. since charter schools came into existence in Michigan. And the reality today is that students attending charter schools in the city of Detroit are getting 3 months on average more learning than their counterparts in the traditional public schools. The recent legislation that was passed now actually brings all schools in Detroit under accountability, including the traditional schools. Heretofore, there's never been a traditional public school that's been closed due to poor performance. And so finally, for the people of Detroit, there is accountability across the board. And I'm pleased and
Mr.
thankful
Chairman,
that that's the case.
I'm out of time, and I apologize. I'd like to say this, Mrs. DeVos, thank you for your willingness to do this, and I'd like to invite you to Denver, to the Denver Public Schools, if you'd be willing to come to see what we're working on there.
I would love to do